Lovely to be with all of you who are here on Zoom and with all of you who are joining us, whether on YouTube or on Facebook, as we prepare to dive into this Torah portion, which is a really special Torah portion. Let's start with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. So this week we are talking about the Exodus from Egypt. After a couple weeks of Torah portions, talking about Pharaoh, promising Moses that, yeah, sure, you can go free, and then taking that away a second that the plague has left. We finally reach the point with our 10th and final plague where Pharaoh says, yes, you can go, and where the people actually leave. Of course, we know that the Pharaoh changes his mind after the Jewish people have left, and there is this climactic moment where they're standing at the water. The Egyptian army is coming after them, and they need to do something in order for the waters to part. This is one of the most dramatic Torah portions that we have. And in fact, this weekend, as we celebrate reading this particular Torah portion, which has a very special melody to it, we also celebrate something called Shabbat Shira, the Shabbat of song, reminiscent of the song that Miriam will sing on the shores of the sea after the Jewish people are freed. But today we're going to dive in and look at this Torah portion through the eyes of the Midah, Bitachon, which I know we've looked at a couple times. I think it's the hardest of all of the Midot. Personally, I find it to be the hardest of all the Midot, this idea of trust in God. And let's dive in so that we can have conversations about it. Let's get this up. Okay. Is that big enough? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. If not, feel free to send me a message if I need to make it a little bit bigger. But I would like to just start with a small section from the commentary by Rabbi Cantor Allison Wissett, who of course is a friend of Temple Bethel. So it's kind of exciting to have her commentary in here to study from. Would anyone like to volunteer to read it?
I can.
Thank you, Ray.
Bitachon, Trusting the Path in block. Rabbi Barry H., The Musar Torah Commentary, A Spiritual Path to Living a Meaningful and Ethical Life. How do we know we are heading in the right direction? Sometimes our path is so winding and long that it feels like we took a wrong turn somewhere. Even the giant signposts that once indicated that we were on the right path ultimately only go to show that up until that moment, we were headed in the right direction. Similarly, the children of Israel experienced the walls of water, an extraordinary miracle, as a sign that so far everything had gone well. But then what? After the experience of an extraordinary miracle, how can we know in which direction to turn now? How do we know how to continue on the right path? A wise teacher of mine once made a comment to an irate man who missed his flight. I don't think you were meant to be on that plane. Why? What do you know? The man belligerently seethed. Because you are not on that plane. Bitachon, the midah, we translate as trust, means believing that somehow the path we are on is the one meant for us.
Okay, so when you were reading this text in the commentary, or when you're listening to it now, thank you, Ray, so much for reading all of that. What is your response to that? This idea of just trusting in God, that if we missed something, if something happened, it is just the way that it was meant to be. Yeah, Jessica.
Well, that seems like circular reasoning to me. He missed the plane, so he's not on the plane, so he wasn't meant to be on the plane because he missed the plane. So I don't know, it just doesn't make sense. It was random, or he missed the plane because of traffic or something else. Oops. But I don't know what she was saying. It's like, it wasn't beshert is what I mean.
Mm-hmm. So there's a discrepancy here. It's not like beshert means this is exactly as it was meant to be. This might be something a little different. So what is she trying to get at? Does this make sense to anyone else?
I have a question. For those, the last part of the sentence, which says somehow, believing that the path we are on is the one meant for us. Well, how about those individuals who are on the paths in their lives and they feel that they can do better, or however they can improve it, they need to improve their lives and their paths, and yet this is saying that it is the one that is meant for those. The word meant and trust are kind of a stretch for me sometimes.
Yeah, is anyone else struggling with the same kind of ideas?
I would say I don't not trust it at all. I think the thing is, we're saying it's simply it is what it is. You're not on that flight, accept life, and who knows, maybe you not making the flight opened up a seat for someone who really needed to get home or really need to get on that flight, and maybe that's just the way it is. Just accept it, and that's what I got out of it, just accepting.
So there's two different kinds of ideas here. Thanks, Frank. That there's the reaction, and frankly, Michael, like your reaction to this, Jessica, your reaction to this is very similar to my own when I started reading it, right? Like, who's to say this is what is meant to be? If there's someone who's struggling, if there's someone who just was diagnosed with an awful condition,
Right.
we're really going to say that was meant for you, meant for this to happen to you? Like, that feels really harsh and unfair. But there is a different way of looking at it. And it's not necessarily about fate. Like, this is how it was lined in the heavens. It was always supposed to happen that way. Maybe that's not what is meant here. Maybe it's more in line with what Frank is saying of, well, this is how it is. So rather than stressing that it's not something else and wishing for a different reality, just being able to accept it, saying, okay, this is the way things are. This is the way things need to be. Let me make a path forward with this and just kind of trust that I can do that. Yeah, Jay.
Well, what you just said makes a lot of sense to how a lot of us are feeling right now, as a lot of what's going on with COVID right now is beyond our control. I'm not teaching in person. I don't know if Bethel is in person or not right now for school. And as angry as I was at first, I finally came up with the idea that there's some things in life I cannot control. And I think that's what this is trying to tell us here too. Well, we missed the plane. Well, there's nothing we can't control what happened.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Well, I now want to respond to Jay first. There was nothing he could do, but maybe that's after the plane leaves the gate. There's nothing he can do, but there may have been many things he could have done differently to get to the airport on time. This is, who knows. But what I wanted to say before that was that this is very fatalistic. And I don't see Judaism, the one meant for you, or you're being punished or you're being rewarded, or, this is your fate. And I don't think that we are a fatalistic faith.
I think it's also, as somebody who gets triggered myself anyway, is to, you may have made a lot of mistakes coming up to this, but here you are now. It's like, be here now. It's like accepting, and what can I learn from this besides I should leave for the airport earlier, and saying, I can either get really, really upset, or I can decide to remain calm. You always have the choice. And I think that is the challenge, no matter what way it goes.
This reminds me of the prayer of serenity, which I have hanging up above my computer. And it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that all makes sense to me.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, in hearing your comments, I'm reminded of a Jewish story that perhaps you've heard before, and I'm not going to remember all the details, but I will get the gist of it, which is a long time ago, there was a man who had a son. And what happened is the son was given this beautiful, beautiful horse, and everyone said, oh, how lucky you are, how wonderful this is. And the family said, yeah, we'll see. And just kind of left it at that. And then what happened is a few weeks later, the horse ran away and they were devastated. And people said, oh, what a terrible thing. And they said, yeah, well, we'll see. And then this beautiful horse came back with 3 more horses that then became theirs. And people said, wow, how wonderful. They said, well, we'll see. The younger son goes onto one of the horses and is kind of galloping around, and he's thrown from the horse and he breaks his leg. And everyone says, oh, what a terrible thing. And the family again says, yeah, we'll see. And then they're going and they're in the midst of a war. So all of these young boys are being brought together to fight in this war. But because this boy's leg is broken, he's left there. The boys are killed in battle, but this boy survives. And so the story is really kind of playing with this idea that we have in our minds what's good and what's bad. But as Frank was saying a little while ago, right, this idea that there's a broader perspective, and something that appears to be good might not actually be so good, and something that appears to be bad might not actually be bad, because we don't have the long view, which I think is tied up a little bit in this idea of bitachon.
Rabbi Cassi, you opened with the challenge of this particular midah. And so I really appreciate all my fellow students and hear their comments. They make a lot of sense to me. But I feel like I'm going on a merry-go-round. I have circular thinking in my head going on. So the next paragraph that we won't necessarily get to in our book talks about the notion that people have the assurance when doing this midah of God's will. I struggle with that comment. I hear it when the dearest of my friends, endures a chronic illness. I don't feel comfortable saying it's God's will. What I feel comfortable with, I think, how do I explain this? That's why I'm saying I'm going in circles. I have to become comfortable with the uncomfortableness of this, to slow me down and gain an understanding and empower me or whomever, science, my friend, whatever, to deal with this. It's really unsettling for me.
I had read the book. Am I on?
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I read a very long time. What was that, Rabbi? When Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Harold Kushner?
Yes, I read that many years ago. And it really struck me that it made sense in many ways, that it's not God's will that we get sick. You know, it has to do, like you said, with science. But I think the idea too is to accept what is so that you can, you know, help in the best way you can or deal with it in the best way you can so that you could survive, hopefully. You know, if you give up or you say, why me, you know, it takes energy away. And so, you know, it was just really profound to think that, because I struggle with, you know, as I said before, if there's a God, why didn't he intervene in the Holocaust? You know, people can be evil. It's not that God is, you know, makes these things happen. Anyhow, so that's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you, Sari. And I think that also speaks to what you were saying, Marla, right? Like I personally also, I can't believe in a God that is picking people out and saying, you're going to be sick with this and you're going to deal with this devastating tragedy and you're going to deal with that. Like, that's not what I think our tradition really teaches. But if like the way that I'm coming, and I struggle a lot with bitachon, I really, really struggle to understand this midah, just as all of us are, because it's really complicated. The way I'm understanding it is a little bit closer to the idea of confidence, that we can make the most of whatever comes our way, and having that kind of a perspective. Right now I'm reading a book, the most recent book with Jane Goodall. It's like an interview between Jane Goodall and I'm forgetting the name of the man who did the interview, but she's talking about kind of what has gotten her through some of the hardest moments of her life. And it really comes down to some of these same ideas of just believing in herself that she could get through them and having some sort of inner confidence that pushes her forward in doing that. So, I mean, let's sit with that. Let's continue to wrestle with that as we go through some of these texts today.
Rabbi, I just wanted to say one thing. I think that we all have lessons to learn being here on earth, and how we cope with things or deal with things is different for everyone. But I think we all have lessons to learn. I am one of those people with a chronic disease that I've had for, 18 plus years. And I think that your attitude has a lot to do with things. And I will blame my genetics, all our inbreeding in centuries past. But I just think we all have lessons to learn. And it's really how you deal with these things and what you do with them determines a lot. I've never looked at it that God wanted me to have this, or look at the people from 9/11 who got stuck on the freeway or the bridge or whatever and was not in that building when the planes hit it. I mean, is that fate? Is that, were you meant to be here for some other purpose? I think this is a really hard one to put your finger on, but I would never have thought, and I'm not a super religious person, I would never have thought that God chose for me to have whatever I have, and more so blame it on some genetics or some other environmental factor. But I think this is really a struggle for all of us. We all have lessons to learn in this lifetime.
I'd like to say something. I think the idea of distrust is really a relationship that you have with God. You come to God with trust. That's really the key question. It doesn't mean that you don't do anything, but do you have trust? Like the Israelites, did they have trust at the sea? They didn't until Nashon stepped forward. They didn't have trust. They didn't have trust when they got food. That's the question. It's not God doesn't want our belief. God would like our trust. And so it's a question for Bitchon to be trust. Do you trust in God? It doesn't mean everything good's going to happen, but what is your relationship with God? Is it always testing, or do you trust him?
I'd like to say something.
Hold on one second, Michael.
I'm
Jessica
sorry.
had her hand up first,
Oh,
so I
I-
just want to honor that.
oh,
And then Michael,
sure.
we'd love to hear what you have to say right after. Go ahead,
Sure.
Jessica.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Daniel Kahneman, the Israeli scientist, economist who won the Nobel Prize in, I think, 2013, his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about so many of these things. And he says the one thing we forget is the randomness at work in the universe.
Mhm.
It could be a perfectly random thing that somebody gets sick or misses a plane or pick something and put it in the stock market, for example. You know, so I just want to bring that word up, randomness, which is very important.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Michael and then Tom.
I just wanted to say that with what Ray said earlier, that I believe, and I'm very, very sure that what I'm saying is probably true, that regardless of, in spite of Ray's years of having the diseases, whatever that she has, her choice of having faith in herself to heal has really internally enhanced her immune system to combat the conditions. And that's why, knock wood and thank God, she's talking to us today in a very healthy way, because she has chosen to believe, and she knows that it's not, it wasn't that God put her in this condition, but it's the God within her that's totally preserving her life for many, many, many decades to come. That's
And very expensive medicine, as she puts in the chat. Exactly.
That's what I believe. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I would just say, talking about trust in God, from another perspective, our relationship with God is a lot bigger than just our time right on this earth during this kind of life. So, there talk about, kind of the beautiful unity or love that is after, right? If you're coming from that perspective, it also kind of puts another perspective on that trust that things will be okay, right? And then also there was a couple things they mentioned in here. I really focused in on the word cultivate, cultivate that bitachon, and the reference to Deuteronomy, choose life, right? You have these choices, and we're called to make choices and take actions while we're here on this path. And so that kind of adds a different perspective on the overall trust. If we're only looking at it from, well, this wasn't really fair and this didn't happen right now, but it could be a more expansive vision of that.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a really good segue into this text that we have in front of us right here. Because at the very beginning of our portion, we have these verses. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. That this journey, and Rabbi Cantor-Wissett talks a lot about this, right? The circuitous kind of path that we take in life. Very rarely is there a clear path where we see the direction while we are living in it. So often there's twists and turns, and we can kind of look around and say, where am I in this? But that perhaps there is some kind of path that's underneath it all.
I think in this case, I'm just remembering what we just read, is God did not allow us to go from trauma to trauma. which is what would have happened. We've been slaves and then now we're fighting a war. It's like, no. And, you know, things don't always go from bad to bad to worse, but you have to slow down and take another path.
Beautiful. So I'm going to bring in this commentary right here along those same kind of lines, where she teaches in Bishalach, in this Torah portion, the road to the sea is roundabout. The Israelites are led not by way of the land of the Philistines, although always nearer. Perhaps there is no straight path to seeing miracles. Even if we once saw them before, we need to cultivate, goes back to what you're saying, Tom, cultivate the trust of believing that we are in fact on the right path. So it's not necessarily trust that everything is happening for a reason, but rather that we can go on the right path from where we are now. And one more text just to bring in, this is from Alan Marinis, who says, once you recognize that the world is not meant to be nice or comfortable or certain or easy, but that it is set up to be the ideal training ground for the heart, you can trust in God because the world is working just as it should be. The suffering or difficulty in our lives almost never makes sense in the moment and only reveals its logic in time. Have you ever looked back over a section of your life or your whole life itself and only been able to see the storyline in retrospect? How many people have you heard say something like, losing that job turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, though at the time it seemed like a blow?
Oh yeah, I've been there.
I see some head nods and agreement going on here.
Yeah.
So does that change the way that we think of this midah? This idea of trust or bitachon? Yeah, Barbara, do you have something you wanted to say? I see a tentative hand. I don't know what that means.
Well, no, it's sometimes hard to have that trust when, you know, what you just said about, you know, a bad thing, maybe a good thing in retrospect. Well, I don't know, but yeah, I guess I kind of go along with that, but it sure is hard at the time. That's all.
And all bad things aren't good things in retrospect, right? There are some bad things that are just bad things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say that, you know, bad things, like I'm in recovery. So obviously I had bad things happen in my life that made me say, I don't want to live in that burning building of drug addiction and alcoholism. Mm-hmm. So I was stricken with that. But the gift is now I get to help the next person who's coming out of that burning building. Right? If a person, a woman has a miscarriage, she now later, even though it's horrible, me and my ex-wife, we had a miscarriage, how horrible that is. But then later on, we get to counsel someone else who might have had a miscarriage recently. And we say, oh, you're going to get through this. You're going to get through this. You know, me too. That's the greatest thing we can say to each other is, me too. I've been there, you know, and that's when we go through these hard times.
So it's finding the blessings out of the bad. The bad isn't good, but it's finding the blessings that we can take from that experience.
But it's always to help others. It's always for helping others like that. I think that always is a bigger part of, if I can go through something horrible and know that, okay, I'm going to be able to tell another person about this. It makes it the bad. It turns the past into gold, because your gold is now helping other people because of what we went through.
Yeah. Misty, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, that concept, the idea of trusting in God, I think as I've gone through, you know, life, when I was younger versus I was older, I'm much more inclined to give things over to God and trust when events happen or when things happen than I would have when I was in my 20s or 30s, for example. That wouldn't have been my first place to go. But, you know, as I've gotten older, I tend to look at things and I look at God at the same time. And my trust in him always God, him, her, whatever, is always there. Is like events happen and I trust that God is somehow in play there. Something I would not have done in my younger days. And I don't know if that's just from experience over the years, and how things, that retrospect, it talks about it in the commentary, how you look back on things, but it's just more and more having experienced things like that.
So how does that change the way you live your life? And that might be too personal a question.
No, it's a good question. I just tend to go with the flow. It's like if I was on this certain path and all of a sudden I find it's moving a totally different direction than what I had thought and what I had planned, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with it, because I have found that going with it has proven to be more times than not the correct way to go than finding it and trying to do something on my own devices and heading off in a different direction. And again, I think that's just over the years, something that's.
Miss Steele, I'd like to say, in the book quotes St. Augustine is saying, like, you can pray to God, but you better work at it as well. So I think that's what you're saying. You trust God, but you're going to work anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to.
That's like saying, boy, that was really bad luck, or that was really bad luck. And the response is, well, there is no such thing as luck. You make your own luck. There's an element of personal responsibility in life, and this is what I think it's called. What is your responsibility here in this thing? And I think the airplane thing was an incorrect metaphor. I think we make our own way. We build in life through experience some internal kind of mechanism, and you come to the conclusion: why do good things happen to people? Not only good people, but to people. Why do we dwell on why bad things happen? Why do good things happen to people? Good things, and I don't want to go into personal habits or traits, and where I am in my own particular. I think we're leaving us out of it, and it's a two-way relationship. And I like what Larry said about you believe in God, but you got to work at it. And I think the work at it is more important than your belief, because what do we really know the limits to what God can do for us?
Yeah, so hold on just a second, because Larry, as usual, you're 2 steps ahead of where I am, right? I love it. It's wonderful. It pushes things forward. But that's exactly where we're going. We have to remember, though, with all of the midot, the way it works with Musar is that there's always a continuum, right? If we're too far on one end of it, there's a problem there. If we're too far on the other end, there's also a problem there. So if we rely entirely on God and say, yep, I have full trust in God, I'm going to go with the flow always, and it's cool, then that's not going to work out so well, right? We might be really missing out on opportunities. We might not be standing up and taking responsibility for things that we need to take responsibility for. On the other hand, if we go totally in the other direction, and we say all of this is meant for me to take responsibility and kind of jump on, then perhaps we're being too active and not curious enough, and not allowing ourselves to place some sort of a trust in something bigger than ourselves. Hold on, there we go. So let's explore a few more of these texts as we go forward. Very often in Musar, there's something else from this Torah portion that's discussed in connection with bitachon. And so even though Alison Wissett didn't talk about it in her commentary, I thought it was important to bring it in today anyway, which is the idea of manna. So we have this text where God says to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day, that day's portion, that I might thus test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. But on the 6th day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall provide to be double the amount they gather each day. And the text goes on a little bit later. When the fall of dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "That is the bread which God has given you to eat. That is what God has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to each person, for as many as you as they are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent." The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning," but they paid no attention to Moses. Some of it left it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank. And Moses was angry with them, so they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat, for when the sun grew hot, it would melt. And so why is it that bitachon is spoken about with connection to the Omer? Well, every day the Jewish people relied on and needed to place a trust in God that new food would appear. They couldn't hold it over for the next day. They couldn't just have some in the storage shed and say, "Okay, well, if there isn't any tomorrow, I'm still good. I can go and eat what I had," because that food wouldn't be good anymore. But it forced the Israelites to develop this ongoing trust relationship with God. So there is this text that comes from this Tikkun Mitzvot project curriculum, which talks through all of the midot. That's where I got this from, talking about the manna. And I just want to bring this in for all of us. So it reads, why did God choose food as the object of this test? Food is symbolic of our livelihood, our parnasah. It's just another word for livelihood. Providing for our own material well-being and that of our family has been one of the core sources of anxiety throughout human history. Will we have enough to eat? The feeling of scarcity awakened by this question is closely connected to the Yetzer Hara. An overly developed feeling of scarcity can lead to greed, violence, and the worst aspects of human behavior. The manna test was very carefully crafted. God could have just given every household the amount of manna it needed to fulfill its daily nutritional requirements. Rather, they needed to work for the food by collecting the manna from the field. This requirement echoes the curse given to Adam in the Garden of Eden. "Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil you shall eat of it. By the sweat of your brow you shall get bread to eat." Part of being human is that we need to work for our food. But this comes with another challenge. We feel pride in our labor and in our ability to make things and support ourselves. The Torah warns us not to say, "My own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me." The Torah is calling on us to do something quite counterintuitive and perhaps paradoxical. We need to use our capability to earn a livelihood, symbolized by the collecting the manna. At the same time, recognize that it was not just our own capabilities that earned us this livelihood, symbolized by the need to trust that more food will be there tomorrow. And thus, we don't get to do whatever we want with it. Tzedakah is one of the mitzvot that trains us to do this. We earn money through our effort, but need to recognize that portion of those earnings actually belong to the needy. Bitachon calls on us to be powerful actors in the world and employ what is called hishtadlut, human effort. At the same time, it reminds us consistently that we are not ultimately in control. And I think a lot of these texts go back to what you were just saying before, Larry. Like I said, you were 2 steps ahead of me, of this kind of balance between our actions and trust and also the effort that we put forth. Yeah, Michael.
There is one word that kind of really kind of blew me away when I read this earlier before the class. And the word is in that sentence, we earn money through our effort, but need to recognize that a portion of those earnings actually, the word is belong to the needy. And the reason why at least it affected me, is because throughout the year, and especially now, we are getting 3 to 5, pieces of mail each day or more, give to this charity and that. And we do give to many charities, but we choose which ones to give to, but and we live a very good life, thank God. But it says when a portion of those earnings actually belong to, it has a different meaning to me to read that rather than giving here or there. That I don't know. It just affected me in a way that maybe I'm not explaining it as well as it's more of a feeling I'm having inside about the word belong to rather than, giving to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear that. It's a very strong word.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm finished. I apologize for interrupting. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, there's a big difference between the two, right? One of them is I'm giving out of complete generosity. No one expects me to give. I'm giving because out of the goodness of my heart.
Yes.
The other one is, oh, it belongs to someone. I'm not doing it out of generosity. I'm doing it because it actually is my obligation to do it. And that's like a very, very different thing.
Yes. Thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts on this? Either the piece that Michael picked up on or something else from the text? Oh, Larry, you're muted. Can you unmute?
I didn't realize. And one other word that came up, this midot is also connected with courage. It's great to trust God, then you have to have the courage to go on ahead. That is amazing, connecting the two. You trust God, but you have the courage to do the work necessary to get what you deserve is something. But the word courage and bravery, and that's what happened at the Red Sea. Nashon had the courage and bravery to step forward. He said he did it because he trusted. But he to have the courage. Trust is one thing, but the courage has to go along with it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to go down because there's another text that speaks to that. I'll get to that in a second. But Irv, go ahead.
Just a quick thing. Red Sea, Reed Sea. What's right?
Where?
I've heard in my youth it was the Red Sea, but as I grew older, it was changed to reed. The word to reed, not red.
Yes, Sea of Reeds. Right.
Reeds.
Yeah.
What's the answer?
It's the Sea of Reeds.
Reed. So it's not the Red Sea.
All right.
Reed Sea. Okay, got it. Thank you. And what when I first started reading this, and I looked at the title, and I read it too quickly because I said, "Boy, this is really prescient. What are they talking about Bitcoin in this thing?" It's
right. We're not talking about Bitcoin. That's right.
That is funny.
That's funny. I think that this piece right here that Alan Marinis read, the other kind of section, speaks a little bit to this idea of courage that you were talking to as well, Larry. Do you want to read this?
Sure. Effort combined with trust yields calmness. You have absolutely, because when you willingly accept whatever result comes out of your actions, what could there possibly be to worry about? Jewish sources stress that through trust, casting your burden on God, you free yourself from worldly cares, bringing on the calmness and tranquility so much of us long for and try to find in less than godly ways. Strong trust makes you brave. Once you have developed the attitude that you will be just fine with whatever comes out of your actions, you will feel free to speak out, take steps that reflect your deepest conviction without concern for consequences. In this way, Bichon helps strengthen our soul traits that are susceptible to fear. Amen. For example, people like me, though thankfully more so in the past than today, as someone else said, I think it was Misty said about being older, often slip into saying things that are not true out of fear of consequences, which means that a person with strong trust is likely to find fewer challenges to being honest. And so for any other traits that may be knocked off their proper nature, by the force of fear. Absolute bravery and courage. They happen because we trust God. I know that's what happens with me, and it happens more so as I'm older. Thank you, Misty.
Anyone else have a reaction to this text by Ellen? Thank you so much, Larry.
I think it again goes back to building this through life, even for those who are not true believers or who are go as far as some of the verbiage talk in this situation. It's knowing what you know, and I'm a true believer that a lot of what clouds our mind is stuff we think is true is not true. And I think the people who know what they know can have the courage to do it. And then know what you don't know, because if you don't know, then you're just guessing. So I think this stuff builds up in each of us. It leads us in the right direction. Having faith to help with that kind of thing, you know, I'm not sure. I'm just rambling now, but again, I think the people that are truly successful have this stuff over time. You're not born with it. It's a learned condition, and you get some of it from your background, from your parents, from your DNA, and all that stuff. But and then comes what you have to learn. And if you go by your gut, are you just saying I don't know and I'm just guessing? Are you going by your intuition? You go by, some people think they have flashes of ESP, including myself. You know, I think this paragraph here, I think is really good. And it comes with strong trust in yourself as well, and not just with God.
Beautifully said. Yeah. Jessica, did you want to say something?
Well,
okay.
I sort of backed up. I was just going to say that strong trust can be misplaced, because I know someone who speaks freely out and takes steps that reflects his deepest conviction without concern for consequences. And he's an anti-vaxxer, and he doesn't want his 11-year-old son to be vaccinated. And he's threatened his ex-wife with terrible consequences if she does. And, you know, so I don't know about this. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and that's the double-edged sword there, right? Because if we have confidence and it's the right thing, then it makes sense. But if it's something that is hurtful to others, inner conviction could actually be a detriment. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, oh, I'm sorry. Did you call me?
Sari, you were talking first. So Sari and then Irv.
Yeah. So my turn?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of thinking, you know, looking at all these verses and so forth. And I think that we're talking about God's, you know, having trust in God. And I guess very, very Orthodox people have total trust, put their life in God's hands. And in one way, it's terrific. It simplifies life for them. And I think the majority of us are not like that. We do a lot of questioning and soul searching and so forth. And so I see it more that you are really the only one that can free yourself. Mm-hmm. You can have all the trust in God, but it's really you. We were talking about doing the work. Mm-hmm. That only you yourself can free yourself and change your life and circumstances. And so I see it in that respect, that in order in life, you have to accept, and it's not an easy thing, and you work on it for the rest of your life to accept. And it goes with gratitude and appreciation of what is. And you can only move forward in life if you accept what is now, you know? And so I see it more that way, not the blind trust. And God, it's wonderful to feel that there's a God that looks over us, but you need to take the action and you need to do the work.
Mhm.
Good.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Beautifully said. Irv, did you have something you wanted
I
to say?
just have a quick story. When I was in the Air Force for 8 years, and I was in a squadron where an airplane was lost, and 17 people died. It happened just before I got to that squadron. I met somebody who was supposed to be on the airplane, but was on another airplane following route. I won't go into the circumstance. So he was a survivor because he had a choice. He could they flipped a coin actually, who goes on what. And his life was turned into nothing but misery. They didn't have therapy available at the time and things like that to help him through that thing. But his life went right in the toilet, and you know he had. So the point is, what do you do when a good thing happens? You know, or that was a good thing. He survived. So you have to be able to do good with your life, even though it's traumatic. And you need help, get the help.
So what you're speaking to, Irv, I think it's the other side of it that's really important. It's why bitachon is so important, right? There are so many things in life that we could be struck with that can just knock us sideways. And to be able to have bitachon in those moments of real inner turmoil can be so important, of just having the trust. Yes, we will be able to move forward. Yes, there will be better days in the future, even if it's hard to conceive of them right now. I think that's part of the trust here. And Rabbi Bachi Ibn Pakuda, in his book, The Duties of the Heart, he spoke about a lot of different things that cultivating, going back to that word, Tom, cultivating trust in God can offer different advantages. And these are some of the things that he lists. He says that there can come with that some freedom from worldly cares, of having a broader perspective. Like, yes, this matters right now, but there is something bigger. A peace of mind that comes from not having to travel on faraway roads, which are so physically ruinous and menacing. An easy profession that earns him a good reputation, which allows him enough leisure time to reflect and fulfill his obligations in Torah study and other things that he must do. Few professional cares, even when his product does not sell, when he cannot connect money owed him, or when he becomes ill. He is pleased with everything, even if it goes against his grain. When things are hard, having bitachon means saying, okay, things are hard now, but to use the Jewish expression, gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. There will be better days ahead.
And I think that kind of goes to what Misty was saying. I think when we're younger, we tend to sweat a lot of the small stuff. And we learn that that isn't always productive. And the things we fear, when, you know, they don't usually happen the way we feared them to happen. So I think that, you know, part of it is maturity too. And if we each have a little spark of God in us, then that is our little help to make right decisions and to learn to be a little more carefree and not worry about every single thing or be so judgmental of others.
Thank you, Ray. Really, really wise words. There's so much wisdom in this group. I look forward to being with you every week because I learn a lot from all of you, as well as from these texts. I also want to bring us to this one last piece because I think it's just such an important and powerful way to end this discussion, which is talk about Miriam that I had mentioned at the beginning. That when the people left Egypt, when they finally were free, here's Miriam who leads this at this moment of uncertainty, who leads them in song, singing with gratitude for what they've just undergone. And Rabbi Cantor Allison Wissett says this: we are placed in a world in which we never know whether we're facing a situation in which we simply need to let go and trust, or a situation in which we need to actively resist the direction in which the path ahead of us seems to lead. Our choices determine how we experience our lives. We can assume that God and Moses would have found a way to provide food and water for the Israelites in the desert without the grumbling. The Israelites' inability to master bitachon determined the way they experienced life, full of pain and fear, despite all they had witnessed. Miriam, on the other hand, understands this. In her own need to hold on to bitachon, Miriam takes with her a timbrel. She does not know what the events of life will bring. She only knows that there will come a time to rejoice. Life is full of tragedies, but the events of life do not make up the path of life. The power to rejoice, to celebrate the miracles that have already happened, and to trust that we have done all we can, these things change our experience of events, even if the events themselves do not change.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that is beautiful.
So good to see all your faces now. It's important to have those text up, but I like just being able to look at all of you. And for the people joining us online as well, I'm so glad that you can be here. So just some final thoughts and takeaways from this text, which I know all of these texts are really challenging. Bitachon is really challenging. That we've talked about the ways in which there are moments where, just like in our prayer book says, pray as if everything depends on God, act as if everything depends on you, right? We have this balance within ourselves that we've been talking to, that maybe not everything in our life, or perhaps nothing in our life, is predestined, but that we can come at it from a perspective of this kind of maturity that was so beautifully articulated by so many of you today, of being able to find ways to just accept the world as it is and to go forward with that acceptance, not sweating the small stuff, but having a broader view and bringing our whole selves to the experience to find the blessings even in the darkness. Any final other thoughts that anyone wants to offer as we close out today?
I'm awfully glad that Musar entered our program. It's really changed my view of study, and I'm grateful for it.
Wonderful. Yes, Shelley.
I've been learning a new song by John Mayer on my guitar, but I love this last verse, which kind of, I think, sums up some of this. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. Fear is a friend who is misunderstood, but I know the heart of life is good. And that's
beautiful.
Feel no matter what, the heart is good. Yeah.
Heart is good. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good hearts in this room right now. Yes, sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, I'm just so appreciating what everybody's saying, taking it in. And I just love the passages today, and reinforces a lot of what I believe in and how I try to live my life. So it's just beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I look forward to studying with you again next Thursday as we move a little further into the book of Exodus.
Use good judgment when you get the Bitcoin.
Yes. Stay safe, everyone.
Yes. Bye.
Love you well.
Bye.